historic conflicts.
In August 1945, World War II ended. But for the Korean people, the battle for their future had only just begun. For 35 years, Korea had lived under brutal Japanese colonial rule. Its language was banned, its culture suppressed, and its people forced into labor and war. When Japan surrendered, Koreans dreamed of independence, of rebuilding a united homeland. But that dream would be shattered in a matter of days. With the world reeling from war, the United States and the Soviet Union rushed to divide former Japanese territories. They drew an invisible line across the Korean peninsula, the 38th parallel. To the north, Soviet troops accepted the surrender of Japanese forces. To the south, American forces did the same. It was meant to be temporary, a line on a map. But in the chaos of post-war politics, it became something far more permanent. Two governments emerged. In the north, backed by Moscow, a young guerrilla commander named Kim Il-sung rose to power. In the south, supported by Washington, an aging nationalist, Syngman Rhee took control. Both men claimed to be the true leader of all Korea. Both prepared for war. Tensions boiled, skirmishes flared along the border. Civilians lived in fear, caught between propaganda, ideology, and the growing shadow of conflict. No one wanted another war, but neither side was willing to back down. And soon the Korean peninsula would erupt in fire. June 25, 1950. At dawn, thunder roared across the Korean peninsula. But it wasn't a storm, it was artillery fire. Hundreds of shells raining down on the south as North Korean troops poured across the 38th parallel. Tanks, infantry, and Soviet-supplied weapons, all moving fast, all with one goal: unify Korea by force. It was a surprise attack, but not entirely unexpected. The world had been watching the border grow hotter for months. Still, no one believed the North would strike so hard or so suddenly. In just 3 days, the capital, Seoul, fell. South Korean forces, unprepared and overwhelmed, collapsed in retreat. Civilians fled by the thousands, some barefoot, some carrying only their children, heading south through burning towns and shattered villages. The world watched in horror. In New York, the United Nations Security Council held an emergency session. And with the Soviet Union absent, boycotting the UN over the China issue, the Council passed a historic resolution. Military force would be used to repel the North Korean invasion. The United States took the lead. President Harry Truman saw the attack as a test, not just of Korea, but of the entire post-war order. If North Korea succeeded, who would be next? Just 5 years after World War II, the world was marching back into war. And this time, the Cold War had turned hot. The world had changed in just weeks. North Korea was winning and fast. With Seoul lost and most of South Korea under enemy control, it looked like the war would be over before the world could react. But then came General Douglas MacArthur, larger than life, dramatic, and utterly fearless. MacArthur had a plan, not just to defend the South, but to turn the war upside down. While North Korean forces pushed south toward the port of Busan, MacArthur proposed something unthinkable: a surprise amphibious assault far behind enemy lines at a risky, narrow port called Inchon. Everyone thought it was madness. Tides were extreme, waters were shallow. The approach was tight and dangerous. But MacArthur insisted. The very arguments against Inchon are the reasons why we should strike there. On September 15, 1950, under the cover of darkness and rising tides, thousands of UN troops stormed ashore. It was a brilliant success. The North Korean army was caught completely off guard. Within days, UN forces broke through their lines, retook Seoul, and began pushing north, hard and fast. Hope returned to the south, but with every mile gained, the war moved closer to a new and dangerous frontier: the Yalu River, the border with communist China. And behind that river, a sleeping giant was watching. By late October 1950, victory seemed within reach. UN forces had stormed north, pushing deep into enemy territory. Pyongyang had fallen. Kim Il-sung's army was in retreat, and American troops were just miles from the Yalu River, the border with communist China. But then, the warnings came. If foreign troops cross the 38th parallel, China will act. General MacArthur dismissed it. He believed China wouldn't dare. After all, this was America. fresh from victory in World War II. But China dared. In the dead of night, under cover of snow and silence, wave after wave of Chinese volunteer troops crossed the icy Yalu. They struck with speed, coordination, and ferocity. American and UN forces, unprepared for the sheer scale of the assault, were thrown into chaos. Men froze in foxholes. Command posts were overrun. Entire units vanished into the mountains. Seoul fell again. It was a devastating reversal. General MacArthur, stunned by the Chinese intervention, called for massive retaliation, including bombing Chinese territory and even using nuclear weapons. But President Truman said no. He feared that widening the war could lead to a third world war, this time one with nuclear fire. In April 1951, Truman made a bold, controversial move. He fired MacArthur. Across America, there was outrage. But for Truman, it was clear. This war had already gone too far. And yet, it was far from over. By mid-1951, the war had changed. There were no more sweeping offensives, no bold landings, no rapid advances. Instead, the front froze. The 38th parallel, the same line that had divided Korea before the war, once again became the center of a deadly tug-of-war. For over 2 years, soldiers on both sides fought in trenches, bunkers, and muddy hills. It was a war of inches, and every inch cost blood. Places like Heartbreak Ridge, Pork Chop Hill, and Bloody Ridge became names burned into memory, not because of victory, but because of the sheer number of young men who died there. Meanwhile, peace talks had begun at Panmunjom, a small village near the front, but the negotiations dragged on endlessly. The biggest obstacle? Prisoners of war. The UN insisted that POWs should have the right to choose where they went, north or south. But North Korea and China demanded that all prisoners be returned, no exceptions. As the diplomats argued, the soldiers kept dying. Shells fell daily, mines exploded, snipers hunted men who dared peek above the trenches. And all the while, Korea burned. Over 3 million people were dead or missing. Cities lay in ruins. Families were forever split. And yet the war continued. Not because anyone believed in victory anymore, but because no one was willing to admit defeat. On July 27, 1953, after more than 2 years of brutal stalemate, an agreement was finally signed. Not a peace treaty, but an armistice. At Panmunjom, representatives from North Korea, China, and the United Nations Command put pen to paper. The war was over, but peace never truly came. The agreement created a new demilitarized zone, a narrow strip of land 4 kilometers wide, stretching across the entire Korean peninsula. It's the most heavily fortified border in the world today, and it still divides a people who once spoke the same language, shared the same history, and dreamed the same dreams. Over 3 million lives were lost. Entire cities like Seoul and Pyongyang were reduced to rubble. Families were torn apart, many never to reunite again. And yet, the war left no winner. North Korea became more isolated, turning into a rigid dictatorship under Kim Il-sung. South Korea, with American support, rebuilt itself, slowly at first, but eventually rising to become a modern powerhouse. But the scar remains. To this day, North and South Korea are still technically at war because no peace treaty was ever signed. And every so often, gunfire echoes across the DMZ, missiles are tested, threats exchanged. The Korean War is often called the Forgotten War, but for millions, it has never been forgotten, and perhaps it has never truly ended. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others. History isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the world we live in now, and sometimes the wars we forget are the ones that shaped everything. Thank you for respecting history. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and write the bell so you don't miss any battles.